Welcome, everybody, to the Lasting Hope Podcast. This is Josh back in the cave after 2 weeks of Christmas break. I have Isaac in here with me tonight, and we have a fun adventure. I've never actually read the entire book of Ruth, and I feel like I'm heavily missing out after what I've heard from good old Isaac here. So we're going to dive right into the book of Ruth, and we're just going to take it step by step.
Kind of like we did with the book of Jonah.
Yeah, like we did with the book of Jonah. So
it is one of the shorter books, so it will not take us long.
No.
Is it okay if I just hop back a couple verses just
Do
to
it.
give some context?
Do it.
So Ruth actually takes place, it starts off by saying, in the days when the judges ruled. So we know it's leading out of the book of Judges. But just to give some context, I'm going to read the last couple verses of Judges 21. This is verses 24 and 25. At that time, the Israelites left the place and went home to their tribes and clans, each to his own inheritance. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. When I was at North Point, there was a saying about Judges. It's essentially the dumpster fire of the Bible. Is everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and as you and I know, anytime you're doing what's right in your own eyes, it's not actually right. So,
Right.
Just giving some context to what was going on at this time. So, do we want to just jump right in?
Yeah, let's take it. Let's jump right into it. I'll let you take lead.
All right. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah gathered his wife and his 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were the Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah, and the other named Ruth. I'm working on one eye today. I've got a sty. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So it's just setting up worst case scenario. Naomi has left during a time of famine with her husband, and her husband died, leaving her with her 2 sons. Her 2 sons marry Moabites, and they end up dying too. So it's just Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law. And just for context, Moabites were not someone that would be typically considered fit to marry. So when they're doing what's right in their own eyes, they end up doing something that is actually looked down upon. They take on wives from a tribe that's not necessarily considered fit for marriage with anybody from the tribes of Israel. So when Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who would become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to a son, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." Now, this is kind of important. Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So Naomi recognizes that her sons made a mistake in marrying the Moabite women, but is still treating them as her daughters. She's saying, I want you to do what is best for you, right? You need someone to take care of you. In Israel, they had this concept that was called the kinsman redeemer. Essentially, it is that if the husband of somebody dies, then the brother would take care of them. So that's what Naomi is referring to when she said, if I had another son, would you wait for him to grow for you to have somebody to take care of you? No, it's better that you go back and find someone to take care of you right now, because this is not a good time to be waiting. But she's even encouraging them to go back to their gods, recognizing that the Moabites do not worship Yahweh. She's encouraging them to go back to their culture. And while Orpah does it, Ruth says, no, I ain't doing that. I'm coming with you. No matter the consequence, I am going to serve your God. I'm going to be with your people. From this day forward, I am essentially your daughter. So she is throwing all her chips in because she is remaining faithful to who she has.
Yeah.
So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived at Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women explained, can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. So, good news! Essentially, this famine is coming to an end, but the bad news is they're still in a rough situation. Men were the primary caretakers of the home. If you didn't have a man in your life, you were essentially ruined. So Ruth has no husband to fall back on, her sons aren't around, and all she has is a daughter-in-law with her. So they're going into the land of Judah very destitute, and this is in the time of Judges, when everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. Pretty much worst case scenario, except that she still has family with her, which is just incredible to begin with, that God would even bless her with that. Because it seems like Naomi's kind of taken, I don't want to say that she's got an attitude about it, but she did lose everything.
Yeah.
Like, you lost your husband, you lost your kids, all you got is a daughter-in-law. And yeah, that's something to celebrate, but also I can understand why she would be more.
In the trying time of grieving and loss, yeah.
Part of me is like,
let's cut her a little slack.
Maybe we could be a little more, we could rejoice in the fact that you still have your daughter-in-law, but I understand where she's at. This is a very sore
Would you
time.
React differently?
Yeah, no,
I
probably would. But, it's hard to say to yourself, if I were in this situation, would I react the same? Because you're not in that situation.
Right.
I have a wife and a daughter, and I love them very, very much. And I'm sure if I lost my wife tomorrow, I would be just destitute. But that's not the case.
Yeah.
But it is for Naomi. And Naomi's struggling right now. She's on a struggle list. So, we move forward. Ruth meets Boaz in the grain field. Now, this is going to introduce a concept that's very common in the Bible. It's essentially where we get the idea of tithing. So, what they did back then is they would harvest 90% of the field, and then the 10th% would actually be left for people who had no home, the widows, the orphans, anybody who was in a state, right? So now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field that belonged to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who is that young woman, and who does she belong to? The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Do not go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." Now, this is excellent setup right here. Boaz is not the example that everybody else in Judah is right now. This man has seen somebody from a foreign land who just came back from escaping the famine, which he probably stayed and promptly dealt with, and he has looked and he has taken favor and grace on this foreigner who is gleaning in his fields, and he has said, "Nobody is to touch you." That is rare in a time when everybody's doing whatever the heck they want, right? At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." She sat down with the harvesters. He offered her some roasted grain. She ate all that she wanted and had left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves, and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." Now he's going even further. Typically, they would only pick up the leftovers, and he's saying leave some behind for her. Make sure she has more than enough. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. I don't know what that is. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over, and what she had eaten. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Ruth told her mother-in-law the one whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz." "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing kindness to the living and the dead. That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." So that is probably a sort of mistranslation of kinsman redeemer. Essentially, it would be his responsibility to take care of Naomi and her family, because her husband has passed. And again, this is the time when everybody's doing whatever the heck they want.
Yep.
Boaz is the exception. He's saying, "This is my responsibility. I am dealing with a foreigner from a land who is the husband, or who is the wife of the son of my, sister-in-law, whatever." Complicated relationship, and he is immediately jumping in and saying, "We have to take care of these people." Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." Again, pointing out the fact that everybody's doing whatever.
Yeah.
So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So the barley and wheat harvests being finished, that suggests that a certain span of time has occurred, that it's all been grown, it's all been harvested, and they're all
The season.
The
season, yep.
And granted, harvesting is probably quite a bit shorter than growing, but we're coming up to the end of that season, and we're coming up to the threshing floor, which is where everybody, processed all their grain. And again, this is a really short book. We only got a couple more chapters to go, so if you want, we can keep plugging through and
we'll keep plugging
discuss
through
once
it.
we get to the end.
Yeah.
All right, Ruth and Boaz at the threshing floor. And again, Elijah has mentioned on previous podcasts, these little titles that you see, and even the chapter numbers and the verse numbers, they're really more for structure. These did not exist when the scrolls were written. It was just kind of like one big run-on story.
Yeah, it's more of a reference point.
Right.
So you can say, this is where
XYZ happens.
You can quote
right.
easier.
One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. My goodness, I'm tripping over my words like a two-left-footed dancer. Wash, put on your best perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went to go lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant, Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you have showed earlier. You have not run after the youngest men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. The people of my town know you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another one more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do this duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." Now, just to give some context, when she tells Ruth to go lay down at his feet uncovered, she is telling Ruth here, Naomi is telling Ruth to be submissive and to present herself fully as a servant to Boaz, right? To give him great honor, essentially. A lot of argument goes into what exactly the uncovering of the feet meant, but it shows right there that Boaz is greatly honored by this, and he immediately, talks her up, tells her how great her character is. But he says something else that's important. He says, "There is another relative who is closer in relation than I am. If he will not be your guardian redeemer, then I will be." That's important because Boaz clearly has taken a liking to this woman. Everybody else is doing what's right in their own eyes, and he is still doing what the law would have required of them. The closest kinsman redeemer would have married either Ruth or Naomi, probably Ruth because she's the younger of the two, but to take care of them, to take it on themselves to take care of them. So Boaz is saying, you are a great, fantastic woman, but there is another who this responsibility technically under the law belongs to. If he says no, I will have you. And he even swears, by the Lord, as surely as he lives, I will do it. Nobody, and granted, we're told not to swear by anything, not in heaven or on earth or anything in between. So I would say that's probably the closest that Boaz ever comes to anything blasphemous. But he's saying it as, listen, because he lives and because he needs you to be cared for, if they do not do it, I will do it. So it's really cool. People sleep on this book because it's so short, and you'll notice the only time it has mentioned God yet is when Ruth herself says, I will follow your God, and when Boaz here says, surely as the Lord lives. It is not saying that God directed their steps. It is saying that Ruth is doing something faithfully, which is amazing that a foreigner is doing something so faithfully in a time of faithlessness. And I think we'll talk about later what that could speak to Right. So where were we? Verse 14. So she lay at his feet till morning, but got up before anyone could recognize. And he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. He said also, bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, he gave me 6 measures of barley, saying, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today.
We're going to take a quick break real quick. We'll be right back. I want to take this opportunity to talk to you about the community Bible craze. It's something we're doing here through the Lasting Hope podcast. It's pretty easy to get involved. Just go to your local Walmart or Hobby Lobby or even on Amazon and purchase a new Bible or a daily devotional. We'll take really any Christian literature that you can get your hands on, and you can either get a hold of us here and have it directly shipped here, or somehow we'll get to it and we'll get it. But really what we want to do with that is it's our heart to make the Word of God accessible to all people, whether it's the less fortunate, young adults, teens. We just want to get this stuff out into circulation so people have easier access to it. And then we also want to build some salvation packets that we can give out to new believers and people who are just coming to Christ. I have a book here called Top 10 Things for New Christians to Understand. It's by somebody I know, a guy that I really, really revere and look up to. His name is Kerry Waldy. So we just want to be able to give these gifts out to people free of charge to them. We're taking donations on new Bibles, daily devotionals, new Christian literature. Really anything Christian literature-wise. And we'll even take movies. If you guys have some of your favorite Christian movies that you'd like to get it out into circulation, pick them up, get them to us, and we'll get them out into circulation. So with that being said, we appreciate all the donations we have received so far, and we also appreciate the donations to come. We've gotten on board with a couple of homeless shelters. I'd like to get in with some food banks so we can get this stuff out to the people that really need it the most, that need to hear the message of Jesus Christ. So thank you very much for your donations and all your consideration, and back to the show.
Should we get back into it?
Welcome back to the Lasting Hope podcast. We are in Ruth. I'm just going to get started here on chapter 4. Take it away.
All right, sweet. I gotta say, I also slept on this book for the longest time. We went through this in Old Testament history when I was going to North Point. This is one of the greatest books I've ever read. And I am not a romantic at heart. That's a lie. I totally am.
He is.
But this is my wife's favorite book, hands down. And you can see why as we're watching Boaz be the righteous man among all of Israel right now.
Yeah, we were just talking about that on the break of this is a book of romance, per se, biblical romance.
Boaz is doing everything essentially by the book.
Yeah.
Like, he sees this woman. This is a foreigner, right? Typically, those things that were done to care for the widow and the orphan, that was like within the tribes of Israel as a way to make sure that everybody in the tribes was cared for. And he says to this foreigner who has had great faith, who has left her home, her gods, her people, and he says to her, you are deserving of all the same things that the Lord has put in place for his people, because you are a woman of great faith. So we're going to jump right into chapter 4 here. And this is largely getting the legality stuff out of the way. Boaz marries Ruth. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here, and they did so. Then when he said to the guardian redeemer, Naomi has come back from Moab, is selling piece of land that belonged to her relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so, but if you will not, tell me, and I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am the next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, on the day that you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the guardian redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Now in the earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. Now, we see here, there's two things that's happening. He's saying that there is land that needs to be sold because Naomi cannot keep it, right? It has to belong to a male figurehead. So she is selling it, and the kinsman redeemer is being alerted to it so that he can buy it. Of course, with the tenets of being the kinsman redeemer, he also has to take on Ruth the Moabite, who has also been widowed. And because she is a foreigner, this guy's worried about how it's going to smear his reputation. So he says, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't do that. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnessing that I bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from us among the family, or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So, Tamar, recognize the name, right? It's from the story of the prostitute who helped the Jewish spies exit the city after they had been in. So we already know that the Lord blessed Tamar and even blessed her with children to Judah, right? And that's important to mention, that they are giving this blessing to Boaz, but also, frankly, because he's going to be marrying Ruth to her and to her ability to bear children. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The woman living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This, then, is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. Now this is the end of Ruth, right? It ends off with the genealogy for very good reason. If you were keen about it, you know that it goes back to Perez, right? And it goes through and lists everybody back from when Tamar bore, right?
Yeah.
And it goes through to Boaz, who now is bearing Obed, who will eventually bear Jesse and then David, which is kind of nuts, right? The Lord has taken Ruth, who has been faithful, not to her own gods and to her own people, but to Yahweh and the people that she married into. She has been faithful, and she has now been grafted into the very genealogy of Jesus Christ. Which is wild, right? She's the most faithful woman that could possibly have entered Israel only because she was faithful to the woman who just happened to be the mother of her husband. She was faithful in going back with her, in following her new family back to a land that was not her own, kind of like Abraham, back to a people that was not her own, to follow rules that she was unfamiliar with, to do things, and to provide as much as she could by working for a mother that was too old to do so herself. Ruth is a fantastic example of great faith, and Boaz is an exemplary person in a time when Israel is not at its best. Israel goes through different phases. Judges is probably the worst of it, but when you go through Kings, Chronicles, and Chronicles, it's essentially the same story. Kings and Chronicles are, but they have different goals. You will still see throughout, like, they go up and down. They have kings that are righteous and kings that are fallen. And Boaz is like the linchpin right before we get into those that says, I'm going to be righteous, this woman is righteous, and our union is going to be righteous. So this book is incredible because you get to see the faithfulness of a foreigner, the faithfulness of a man standing against unfaithfulness in Israel, and the addition of a foreigner into the line of Jesus, the root of David, the Messiah that is to come. This story is a romance at the end of the day, and the only mentions of God are from the people who are being faithful to his tenets. It doesn't say anything about God directing Ruth and Naomi in a specific direction, or saying to Naomi, you should do this because it is right. It doesn't say anything about a still small voice that spoke to her. She was just being faithful, and God rewarded her by bringing her into the fold. And she now is part of the lineage of our Savior. How cool is that?
I'm speechless. I'm processing.
Right? And, it's hard for people to get through Ruth, because admittedly it's kind of hard to read through and say, okay, but where is God in all of this, right? And God's always there. He always has been. But you don't see the mentions of it except from people who are expressing it. God is there in the faith of the people who are following him. And it's that great faith that is rewarded. And it's so cool. I'm speechless. And this is a book that I've read a few times now since I was, encouraged to do so. But I would encourage y'all to read as well, if only to try and see what your version says, if there's anything different, to see what jumps out at you. Read it a few times, because I've done the same thing. Like, I read the story of Abraham and Sarah in the wilderness when the three men appeared to them. I read that thing like 30 times because it was part of a project that we had to do at school. Just all the way through the semester, we were tasked with reading this same passage over and over and see what jumps out at us. Do it with Ruth, because this book, it's honestly incredible, and it is probably not given its due. And it's just really cool, just to be perfectly honest. Context is cool too.
I'm still processing.
It's a lot.
It is. It's a lot, and it's, once again, it's like Jonah. It's one of those little books that is just chock full from beginning to end of, not that the other books of the Bible aren't, of course, but right. It's just, it gets skipped over.
It's kind of like the
so
polar
often.
Opposite of Jonah too.
Yeah, it is.
Because like Jonah's the story of this prophet, this mighty man of God who's supposed to go and deliver a message. Ruth, she's just some lady.
Mm-hmm.
Just some lady who happened to marry an Israelite man. Just some foreigner from a nation who, frankly, follows gods that are not Yahweh, follows customs that are not Israelite customs. In every sense of the word, she is the least of these. And Jonah had pretty much everything. He had fame. People knew him. He had access. He had probably wealth, to be perfectly honest. He probably was the picture of the Pharisees that we see Jesus tackling in his day. But Ruth is the polar opposite. She's nobody of any particular standing. She's just a woman who has great faith, which is more than can probably be said about Jonah, to be honest.
Yeah. And when you take this and you put this into modern day context, is from a man's standpoint, you can look at this. You look back at that of Boaz in his faithfulness, in his obedience, in taking this on. The way that he did things was step by step, by the book. It was by the law, because when Ruth came to him, he could have done whatever the heck he wanted, because that was the trend then, and that's the trend now, is we're just kind of doing whatever we want to do. And from a man's standpoint, I think a man, whether you're married, single, 12, 65, you can read that and you can just look at Boaz and the story and you take something from it.
Yeah.
Because I've read the snippets, I've heard the snippets, and I listened to a teaching on it today because I knew we were going to be talking about it, just to kind of amp myself up so I didn't go in blind. And I was sitting here, I'm like, I'm married. Is the it's that question of, okay, am I doing this? Am I being practical with this? And a lot of things, yes. A lot of things, no. And people kind of look at that too, and that, well, things are so much more complicated now.
I would agree, but I would disagree, right? Like, of course things are more complicated. We have infinite information machines that are approximately 3.5 inches by 6 inches sitting right in your pocket. You have access to everything from the Bible to texts about Buddha to history from ancient Mesopotamia, and we don't touch any of it. It's just there for our convenience and our entertainment. But instead, life is still just as uncomplicated as it always was.
Yeah.
People are supposed to love one another and care for one another.
When you get to the root, the roots of it are the same.
It's all the same.
I am God and I change not.
Right.
Not much has changed. You look at I'll go to the sins of Sodom.
Right. The sins of Sodom, well, that's a whole other topic.
That is a whole other topic.
One of the people talk about Sodom and the sexual sin.
Yes.
Right? The debauchery that occurred, and of course that is awful. But it was pointed out to me, and it just shocked me how much I totally didn't even recognize it, that the worst sin of Sodom was not loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
Everybody did what was right in their own eyes at Sodom. They are just a picture of Israel and Judges, but without God.
Yeah.
So it really is the same. Do you choose God? Do you not choose God? Do you choose to love one another, or do you choose to love yourself?
Yep.
That's the two greatest commands. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself.
And I reference this verse probably more than I reference any other verse, except for probably something from Corinthians, is choose today who you will serve. Maybe because that's my name.
Right.
But I've always been drawn to the book of Joshua because it is my name. But
Joshua was a warrior, man.
Yeah.
Joshua was
he was a man's man.
He was a man's man. He took over after Moses, who got so mad with the Israelites that he threw down the stone tablets that God gave him.
Yeah.
Like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Gotta go get the tablets all made up again.
But, when you look at Ruth, she chose. She had a choice to make. Mm-hmm. The same choice that Boaz had to make at some point. He had to make that choice.
Do I do what's comfortable for me, or do I do what is right?
And we have the same choice today. Mm-hmm. I mean, clearly, we have the exact same choice today.
Yeah. It's just amazing. And this book, read it. please. It's so worth it. Everything in the Bible is worth it. But if you've been sleeping on this book, if you haven't read through it, if you feel like, well, it's not really for me, the whole Bible is for you. It wasn't written to you, but it was written for you.
Yeah.
Right? Please do read it. It's so worth it.
Yeah, like I said, I found so much joy in the little books.
Mm-hmm.
I find it in the other books as well, but just something about the little books that you don't read because they're little books. You skip over them when you're flipping through the pages, and I just am shocked at how much powerful stuff is packed into 3 or 4 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's little chapters. They're not big chapters either.
It's faith, it's fear, it's loss, it's gain, it's so many things all in one little story. It probably could fit on a napkin if you wrote small enough.
Yeah.
And it's simple. It's love and it's faith and it's all right there.
It's a very personal book.
It really is.
It's a very, very personal book.
Like, this is about the equivalent of airing somebody's personal business, but because it was a story of faith, they were like, nah, this is worth chronicling.
Yeah.
This is so worth it.
Yeah. And it is. It's a some books in the Bible you do teachings on.
Yeah.
This book is a teaching.
Yeah.
On its own.
All on its own.
You can, like, we literally, all we did was read it, put a couple blurbs in there for clarification. When I say we, I mean Isaac.
Yeah.
Put some blurbs in there for clarification, but the story tells itself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a romance. It's a thriller.
It kind of is.
Because you don't know what's going to happen. If you've never read it before and you start reading it, you're like, oh my gosh, these widows.
They're in, like, the worst possible time.
They're in the worst.
Widows are back to Israel.
It, especially with the way that women were treated in that period. You know, when you look at people were doing whatever the heck they wanted. Men were doing whatever the heck they wanted.
Yeah.
And that, to me, you look at Boaz, once again, I'm going to go back and say it again. You look at Boaz, who had this woman, who I'm sure was a very beautiful woman, pretty much at his feet, literally at his feet. He could have done anything he wanted, but he still said there was someone who's closer in relation. Go to them first, and if they will not, then I will.
He even goes on her behalf.
Yeah.
Like, he could have said to her, according to our customs, it is, your kinsman redeemer should know. He goes for her. He presents to the kinsman redeemer, listen, on behalf of this woman, here's what you should know. And the kinsman redeemer is like, I'll take the land, but actually, no, I can't because of the woman.
And that, on its own, is, I'll take the land, but I don't want the woman.
But that's why he forfeits. He's like, if I have to have a foreigner as a wife, and mind you, the kinsman redeemer was allowed to have more than one wife. It was a stipulation, not so that you could violate the sanctity of one woman and one man in marriage together, but because under the marriage covenant, they were given protections that they would not have otherwise. So you would still have one man and one woman, but that man would be allowed to marry other women, to graft them in and give them protections they would not typically have. Right. So the kinsman redeemer typically could have more than one wife. It was not common, but when it happened, it was not looked down upon because they needed protection.
Right.
So Boaz, just absolute stand-up guy. I was reading through Ruth before I met my wife, and I'm not going to lie, Boaz has influenced a lot of the way that I approached her. I just love her so much. I love her to death. And I was ready to serve her before I was ready to marry her. And ultimately, that's really what Boaz was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. He was there the entire time. He was the friend before he was the how you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But
Just absolutely. And he had standing. He had power.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not as much as like a king, because they were kingless, but any dude was standing in power in that time in Israel, except Boaz, would have done exactly what Boaz didn't do.
Yeah.
So, just absolutely wonderful book. I cannot recommend enough that you go and read it. And like Josh here said, the little books, they make all the difference, because it really helps put into perspective what God can and does do.
And when you connect it to the genealogy of David,
oh my gosh,
that just blows you. That blew me away.
Right? Because, I mean, like, they're asking for a human king for all this time, and he gives them Saul, of course.
Yeah.
And Saul's ruling, and they're like, man, this guy's terrible. We need a different king. God's like, hold up, I've been working on it. I've been working on it for some time. You just hang on to your shorts.
So you take a foreigner woman.
Two foreigner women.
Yep.
You got Tamar and you got Ruth, and both of them are not Israelites, but they are faithful and they are rewarded for that faith. Jesus is, by all accounts, tainted blood according to Israel, but according to God, because they were faithful. No.
And we see that on the flip side after Jesus, when the Gentiles are now brought in through the blood of Christ.
Oh, it is just so cool.
Because we are foreigners.
We are.
We were talking about that too.
Right?
We were talking about that during the break too.
I don't think I have any Jewish blood. I have Polish blood in me I could have Jewish heritage. I do not know, but ultimately that doesn't matter to me. I am, by all accounts, a foreigner. I was born an American. I was raised an American. And at the age of 19, I made the choice to say, you know what? Before I am an American, I am a citizen of heaven.
That's right.
The blood of Jesus is over me now, and I have been grafted in. And that is so cool, guys!
Yeah. Who do you belong to? The kingdom of God.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you guys for listening. We have a pretty packed week here. So we're doing one today, I'm doing one tomorrow, I'm doing one the day after that, and I have a day off, and then I'm doing another one, and I might be doing another one. So that's it for today, guys. I will catch you guys later. Thanks for listening. Ike, you want to say goodbye?
See you later, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Lasting Hope podcast. We really hope that you enjoyed today's show. Just please, if you would, go like, share, and subscribe to us on Spotify and YouTube. Share us on Facebook. And we want to get this message out to as many people as we can, because we feel it's the most important message in the world, the message of Jesus Christ. So once again, we thank you all for listening, supporting us. Thank you for your donations so we can get our equipment. You guys have a blessed week. We'll talk to you soon.